On October 23, 2025, June Lockhart, the last surviving adult star of Lost in Space, passed away at the age of 100. Before she left, she had said things in her final interviews that the network never wanted public. Today, we are going inside the Jupiter 2 and pulling out every secret buried for 60 years. These people carried stories their whole lives. And now, finally, every single one of them can be told. The final survivor's shocking revelation. There is something about outliving nearly everyone you worked with that makes a person stop protecting a story. When the cameras are rolling for what might be the last time, you stop choosing your words carefully, and you just tell the truth. That is exactly what happened in the final years of the Lost in Space cast. By 2025, only 3 members of the original Robinson family were still alive. Bill Mumy, who played the boy genius Will Robinson from age 10 to 14, turned 72. Angela Cartwright, his television sister Penny, turned 73. Marta Kristen, the eldest daughter Judy, reached 81. And before June Lockhart, the mother of the family, died peacefully in Santa Monica on October 23, 2025, she had already been speaking more freely than at any point in the previous 6 decades. In her final interviews, Lockhart described what it actually felt like to learn that Lost in Space had been canceled. She did not receive a phone call. She did not sit with a producer who thanked her for 3 years of work. She read it in a small notice in the entertainment section of her morning newspaper. That was the entirety of the farewell CBS offered to the cast of one of the most watched science fiction shows in American television history. Lockhart was not the only one who carried that wound. Bill Mumy, who was 14 years old when the show ended, told interviewers decades later that he cried when his agent called him with the news. He described filming the last season with the complete belief that a 4th season was already arranged. Then the renewal list appeared, and the Jupiter 2 was not on it. He went home and wept. A 14-year-old boy ending a chapter that had consumed his entire childhood, learning it was over from someone who had to deliver the news over a telephone. What makes this even more striking is that by the time these final revelations came out, Mark Goddard, who had played the rugged pilot Don West, had already died of pulmonary fibrosis on October 10, 2023, at the age of 87. Jonathan Harris, the irreplaceable Dr. Smith, had passed away on November 3, 2002. Bob May, the man who climbed inside the robot suit every single day for 3 years, had died in January 2009. Dick Tufeld, who was the robot's voice, followed in January 2012. And yet, the 3 Robinson children who remain are still finding each other. On March 17, 2026, Bill Mumy posted a photograph of himself standing with Angela Cartwright and Marta Kristen and captioned it, "Judy, Penny, and Will Robinson spotted on Earth yesterday." 60 years after the show first aired, they are still showing up for one another. That single fact tells you something important about what this show really was underneath the foam rubber aliens and the spray-painted props. But here is what nobody outside their circle knew for decades. The cast that survived stayed loyal to each other for 60 years. The man who was supposed to die early ended up controlling the entire show, and he did it so brilliantly that even the people he outmaneuvered eventually admitted it was a masterpiece. Jonathan Harris rewrote his own character and stole the series. Before Jonathan Harris was Dr. Smith, he was a pharmacist's son from a 6-story tenement building in the Bronx, who had literally invented himself from scratch. His parents were Russian immigrants. His father worked in Manhattan's garment district. The boy who grew up speaking what he later described as thick Bronx street slang made a decision early in his life that he was going to become someone else entirely. He changed his surname from Kerr-Suchan to Harris at 17 against his father's furious objections. He changed his surname at 17, earned a pharmacy degree he never used, fabricated an acting resume, and talked his way into a career that would eventually include Broadway, The Twilight Zone, and roughly 125 stage productions. When Irwin Allen offered him the role on Lost in Space, Harris looked at the character as written and immediately recognized a career trap. Smith was a cold-blooded spy who killed a guard in the pilot's opening minutes and reprogrammed the robot to kill the Robinson family in their sleep. He was designed to be despicable and eliminated within 5 episodes. Harris understood exactly what this meant. A role that ends in 5 episodes is not a career. It is an expensive dead end. So, he started rewriting things. Quietly at first. He would arrive on set with entirely new pages of dialogue written overnight. He told the cast, "Let us go over the scene. I have changed all the dialogue." Bill Mumy, still a child at the time, watched this and later described it with genuine awe. Harris would rewrite scenes, and then quietly engineer every beat of the action, so that all roads led back to action, so that all roads led back to Smith. The cowardly eye rolls, the melodramatic wailing about his back, and most importantly, the cascade of invented insults hurled at the robot. None of it appeared in any script. Harris sat up nights constructing phrases like bubble-headed booby, nickel-plated nincompoop, and bellicose nickel-plated nincompoop, and bellicose bumpkin. He explained his reasoning with perfect logic. The robot was wise to Smith's schemes, and Smith had to attack it constantly to keep it from exposing him. Every insult was a survival tactic dressed as comedy. By the time Irwin Allen understood what had happened, 500 fan letters a month were pouring in for Dr. Smith. Allen had no realistic choice but to celebrate it. He later said openly, "Smith was not originally created as a comedy character, but Jonathan Harris dictated what we should do with the character." Harris negotiated a special guest star credit on every one of all 83 episodes, reportedly the first time that billing structure had appeared on American television. But Allen's public praise concealed a private discomfort because the actor he had hired to be his leading hero was watching his entire role dissolve in front of him, and there was nothing either of them could do about it anymore. More Guy Williams, and the slow erasure of a man born to lead. Guy Williams came to Lost in Space as one of the most recognizable men on American television. For years, as Zorro on Disney had made him a genuine star, and the show's merchandise had generated $11 million within months of its premiere. He was tall, fencing trained since age 7, and genuinely excited about playing John Robinson, the brilliant mission commander who would lead his family through the universe. This was supposed to be a show. The transformation happened gradually enough to feel almost polite. In Season 1, William's screen time began shrinking as the Dr. Smith storylines expanded. By Season 2, it was a pattern. By Season 3, it was simply the reality of the production. Williams appeared on set, delivered a handful of lines, and stood in the background while Jonathan Harris and Bill Mumy and the robot carried the episode forward. Mark Goddard described the atmosphere directly. "The show started going more toward the robot and Smith, and there were hard feelings from Guy, especially." Jonathan Harris himself acknowledged the damage, which is remarkable given that he was the cause of it. He said openly that Williams was hired to be the star of the piece and ended up with an occasional line every other week. Harris called this very difficult for an actor to endure. He was correct. He just did not stop doing it. Williams filled his idle hours listening to classical music, reading astronomy, playing chess, and buying stocks. Bill Mumy gave him the nickname the Comb because Williams groomed himself constantly between takes. A man turning restless energy into something harmful. Irwin Allen's team sent him to try on the robot's suit. The audition was brutally simple. If you fit, you are hired. When May climbed out of the suit after his first session inside, he was cut and bleeding from the metal edges. He took the job anyway. The suit weighed approximately 200 pounds. Under studio lights, the interior temperature became what May later described as his own jacuzzi and sauna combined. The costume was nearly airtight. On at least 2 confirmed occasions across the 3 seasons, May passed out inside from lack of oxygen. His eyes rolled back, and he went limp before crew members realized something was wrong. The production company's official response to these incidents was that there was no time to stop filming. May was a devoted smoker who puffed cigarettes inside the costume during breaks between takes. June Lockhart recalled seeing smoke drifting through the robot seams and finding it quietly amusing. The legend involves Irwin Allen arriving between scenes, spotting smoke rising from the apparently empty robot, and panicking that the suit was on fire. When he discovered it was May enjoying a cigarette, Allen reportedly decreed that whenever a script called for the robot to emit smoke, May should personally generate it. Despite performing every physical gesture that made the robot one of television's most beloved characters, Bob May was never credited on screen during the entire original run. Not one episode in all 3 seasons carried his name. The practical consequence was lower pay and significantly reduced residuals. As Lost in Space grew into a global phenomenon generating licensing income across decades, May and his wife, Judith, were living in a mobile home park in the San Fernando Valley. In November 2008, the Sayre fire destroyed their home. 2 months later, May died of congestive heart failure at 69. What defined his later years was not bitterness, but extraordinary generosity. He became one of the most beloved figures on the science fiction convention circuit, staying at signing tables until every fan had their moment, no matter how long it took. He said once, "I will stay at any convention signing autographs until the last fan is finished or the cleaning crew forces me to leave." A man made invisible by the industry that profited from him chose to make sure that no fan ever felt invisible in front of him. The robot smiled for 60 years of reruns, and never once showed what was happening, inside. The show itself worked the same way. Before any of those cameras rolled, Irwin Allen had tried to make something completely different, and the network had buried it before it could breathe. The $600,000 pilot, and the compromise that changed everything. Before there was a robot, before there was a Dr. Smith, before there was a single foam rubber alien or a catchphrase about pain, there was a 60-minute film that Irwin Allen believed was the best work of his career. He was wrong about many things over the years, but on this point, he was probably right. The original Lost in Space pilot titled No Place to Hide was filmed in late 1964 on a budget of approximately $600,000, which made it the most expensive television pilot ever produced at that time. The cinematographer had won 3 Academy Awards. The special effects supervisor was a future Oscar winner. Later, the writer wrote stories for Star Trek. CBS, 20th Century Fox, Red Skelton, and Groucho Marx all helped pay for Allen to make it happen. The story was pure and clean. There was nothing dirty or funny about the story. A meteor storm pushed a family called the Robinsons off course as they tried to reach Alpha Centauri. They ended up on an alien world where they had to figure out how to stay alive. Robinson's parents both had PhDs. Great things happened to the kids. There was no bad guy, no funny parts, no robot, and no strife within the group. It seemed like a real movie. He sang Green Sleeves while sitting by a campfire. A group of smart people worked together to get through a scary situation in this story about life. Alan was ready for professional silence from the CBS leaders when he showed it to them. Instead, they laughed so hard they cried and bought the series right away. Then they gave him a list of things they wanted. The pilot was too caught up in gear. They wanted a regular bad guy who could cause problems every week without having to come up with new threats. Alan proposed that it be Ming the Merciless. His boss told him to write something more like Long John Silver. Dr. Zachary Smith was chosen. A robot was also needed by CBS. The layout of the ship was changed, and the pilot from the first series was locked in a storage room. About 80% of the raw footage was cut up and put into the first 5 episodes of the first season. It was written that Dr. Smith and the robot stayed behind at the ship during those shows, which explains why they weren't seen in footage from almost a year before they were introduced. The first episode of the show aired on September 15, 1965. Few people talk about these two important facts. The set for the inside of Jupiter 2 cost at $350,000. The Jupiter 2 interior set was the most expensive standing TV set of its time. It was even more expensive than Star Trek's whole Enterprise bridge. And the theme music was written by Johnny Williams, who was 24 years old at the time. He later changed his name to John Williams and wrote the music for Star Wars, Jaws, and Indiana Jones. What used to be a serious idea was changed to something that the network could sell, and it worked great for 2 seasons. Ratings, on the other hand, can hide the truth that only those working on the show can see. Also going on behind the scenes were 2 of the most famous science fiction series in American history, which never fully admitted to being at war with each other. Star Trek used stolen ears, a secret show, and a fan in the enemy camp and during the show. The competition between Star Trek and Lost in Space is one of the least understood events in the history of TV because most people think it was just 2 well-known shows competing for the best ideas. In simple terms, the scores were not close. In the weekly Nielsen results, Lost in Space always came in between 32nd and 35th. Over the course of its original run, Star Trek never got any higher than about 52nd. The show that people today think of as the best science fiction of the 1960s was losing every week in the ratings war. The rivalry started before either show even took off. He told CBS about Star Trek in a 2-hour meeting. One of the network's leaders asked him a lot of questions about his plans to make a show. Also, that executive was very interested because CBS was already working on Lost in Space and had no plans to buy another science fiction property. CBS said no, so Roddenberry took Star Trek to NBC. After that, for 3 seasons, both shows competed for the same viewers, but they never aired at the same time. During Season 3, when the Lost in Space makeup team needed to make an alien boy with pointy ears for a show, but didn't have enough time or money, this rivalry turned into the funniest thing that ever happened. So, they took the molds that were used to make Spock's ears from the Star Trek production, painted them a different color, and put them on their own alien figure. Devoted Star Trek fans saw the ears right away and accused Lost in Space of copying them in public. The real reason was very ordinary. The makeup artists for both productions were close friends and often shared resources to meet impossible schedules. Inside the Jupiter 2, a love story that no one expected was happening. On the set of Lost in Space, Angela Cartwright was 13 years old. Bill Mumy was 10 years old. They spent their whole teen years together on that set. They went to Fox's studio school together for lessons, ate lunch together, and ran lines together. Mumy later talked about it in his usual open way. Our first real love was each other. He didn't ask Cartwright to go on a real date until he was old enough to drive. It wasn't because anyone told him to, but because he wanted the event to feel right. In the early 1970s, they were engaged for a short time before breaking up without being angry. 2 teens who knew they were still changing into their own people. What came was something no one saw coming. What came next was something that no one saw coming. They stayed close friends for more than 50 years, not just nicely distant, but really close. They wrote several books together, went to meetings together, and were seen laughing with Marta Kristen as recently as March 2026. Then Mumi had another secret. He worked on Lost in Space, where he fought alien monsters, and every night he went home and watched Star Trek with great excitement. In his own words, he was a dedicated Trekkie throughout the full run of the show that was supposed to be Star Trek's rival. After many years, he made it official by playing a Starfleet officer called Kellen, who dies in battle in an episode of Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. It was said that the director got a lot of pleasure from killing Will Robinson. The feud ended over a strange detail that sounds like it was made up. He passed away on November 2, 1991. Gene Roddenberry had passed away on October 24, 9 days before. Both artists died within 2 weeks of each other. For most of their lives, they were competing for the same part of the American imagination. There were still wounds in what their show left behind that had never been healed, been taken care of. Cancellation, The Carrot Story, and what was finally shown after 60 years. Many people have learned a lot about how TV shows treat the people who make them from the ending of Lost in Space. There were 83 episodes in all, spread out over 3 seasons. It never got a conclusion. The Robinson family was never found and saved. They never made it to Alpha Centauri. They didn't come back home. The family was still stuck on a faraway planet at the end of the last show, thinking they would be back in 8 weeks for season 4, but that was never going to happen. The cancellation came down to a deal that Irwin Allen refused to make. Allen refused to lose the deal. CBS offered to pay for a 4th season with 15% less money. Allen said no. Later, Jonathan Harris told this story with a mix of respect for Allen's pride and anger at the result. The show was canceled not because people stopped watching, but because the director wouldn't take less money. The ruling was made public by CBS on February 19, 1968. June Lockhart read it in her morning paper. Marta Kristen said she couldn't say anything when she got a call. Bill Mumi shed tears. There will be no wrap party. No goodbye. There was no handshake from the network. Before CBS did anything, the show had been sending distress signs for months. The episode that best shows how Lost in Space lost its artistic edge was shown in the last season. It was called The Great Vegetable and The Great Vegetable Rebellion. In it, Dr. Smith picks a flower on an alien world and is then put to the test by a plant that can think and feel. The plant then changes Dr. Smith into a stalk of celery. A man in a full-body foam rubber carrot outfit was the main bad guy. The author, Peter Packer, walked into Jonathan Harris's dressing room with the script behind his back because he was too embarrassed to hand it over openly. The scenes between Guy Williams and June Lockhart were so funny that they couldn't finish them. They couldn't keep their cool, and Irwin Allen was so mad about it that he fired them both for full pay from the next 2 shows for laughing at his own show. The event turned into a sign of failure. Then it turned into something strange. If you want to know what TV Guide thought were the 100 best shows of all time, The Great Vegetable Rebellion was number 76 on that list. The City on the Edge of Forever, which many people think is the best Star Trek episode ever, came in at number 92. There were more people who watched the Carrot episode than who watched the most famous episode of Star Trek ever. The TV is not a logical tool. What happened to the group over the next few decades tells a more complicated story than the business would like to admit. Guy Williams had told Mark Goddard in secret that Lost in Space would ruin his career. Eventually, Goddard hid his connection to the show when he went to Broadway. He took the credit off of his Broadway credits and Playbill credits. After that, he got his master's degree in education and worked as a special education teacher in Massachusetts. He helped kids who needed him in a way that Nielsen numbers could never show. Jonathan Harris worked as a voice actor for the rest of his life. In 1998, he voiced Manny in Pixar's A Bug's Life. The next year, he was in Toy Story 2, and on the animated show Freakazoid, he voiced a character that was a crude parody of Dr. Smith, playing a version of himself playing a version of the character he had developed over 40 years. When the Lost in Space movie came out in 1998, Harris was offered a 6-line cameo by the company. He turned it down in words that became famous right away in Hollywood. "They gave me a harmless 6-line piece they laughingly called a cameo, and I told them to shove it." No matter how old he was, he had never been a bit player in his life. He wasn't going to start now. A reunion movie called Lost in Space. In the early 2000s, work began on the journey home, and Harris was set to play the lead role. After that, Harris went to the hospital in November 2002 because he had a long-term back trouble. The same back that Dr. Smith had been wailed about for 3 seasons, and he died of a blood clot. He was almost 88 days old. He would have been 88 years old in 3 days. He died, and so did the reunion movie. One of the eulogies was given by Bill Mumy. Harris had written that Angela Cartwright could still hear the exact way he had said her name. There was a beautiful way to honor what came before in Netflix's reboot, which ran from 2018 to 2021. The new Dr. Smith was given the full name June Harris, which is a combination of June Lockhart and Jonathan Harris. Bill Mumy played a figure named Dr. Z. Smith in the pilot. In Season 2, Angela Cartwright played Dr. Smith's mother. Even though she is 96 years old, June Lockhart did the voice of Alpha Control in Season 3. After 60 years of watching her, you knew what to expect from her speech. They were smart, friendly, and had the quiet confidence of someone who had been doing this job since 1965. 2 years later, she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 100. She had seen the show canceled, brought back, made fun of, praised, rebooted, and kept alive by 3 generations of fans. She didn't carry the story of that cold newspaper morning in 1968 like a wound. She did it because she had lived through it and moved on. The 3 Robinson children, who are still alive, all have the same trait. They were able to handle what the business did to them with grace and still be kind. People like Bill Mumy, Angela Cartwright, and Marta Kristen can still meet and get together. They still go to meetings and talk about how Irwin Allen hit a bucket with his hammer, and how Jonathan Harris showed up on set with 14 pages of new dialogue he had written the night before. The Jupiter 2 is not something they carry around